was a young man at a camp, and he was excited to go to camp, and he was all fired up, and he talked to his friends about it. And the camp he went, summer camp, all excited. First time ever going to summer camp. And the night came, and it was dark. He's never seen that kind of darkness. So he started to cry. So the counselor went to him and sat on his bed, and he says, you know, are you okay? He goes, yeah, I'm okay. He says, are you afraid of the dark? I could turn a light on right here by your bed. He goes, no. I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of the killer rabbits. Killer rabbits? What are you talking about? Well, his friends had told him that there were going to be killer rabbits in the bushes, and they're going to come out at night and get him. And that fear drove him to take a wonderful experience and make it a nightmare. Folks, so many times have we been told things that have driven us to fear and anxiety. God is saying that when we trust Him and walk with Him, stay focused on His agenda for our lives. Not all the things around us that can be crazy from time to time. The Bible says don't live by sight, but live driven by what the Word of God is saying. So let's remove fear and focus on faith. Stay tuned to this message this morning. It's a blessing, and thank you so much for allowing us in your home. And I pray that this message touches your life in a powerful way. Stay tuned.
One of the things that ministry has taught me is failure is not defeat. There are times when you'll be failure, even being a husband, when, there's times when I failed as a husband and just managing the home succinctly, or traveling too much and having to adjust the schedule, or getting upset and having to apologize. Whatever the issues were that I brought failure, I've learned over life's time it was not defeat. But what was encouraging during all of these situations has been that, great men of God failed miserably. I mean, Abraham, I'm sorry, but ain't no way I'm going to tell another man, she my sister, I know he taking her to his bedroom. Peace on that. I just got to die. I'm sorry. But it's easier said than done when you are there and the most powerful military is there. That's like a military of the size of America. Let's just put it in our world. Fast bombs, smart bombs. Well, my brother gets mad when I say smart bombs. He thinks that is an oxymoron. But smart bombs, tanks, all this stuff, you know that this man has that kind of backing and he has that kind of power. There's no House of Representatives, there's no Congress, there's no Supreme Court. He says, do this, it's done. So it's easy for me to stand here and say that, but Abraham failed. It was a man who is a sinful man who had to release Abraham to go back to his life, or his situation in Egypt would have gotten worse. So, we could sit back and look at all these men. David, a man after God's own heart. Checking out Rahab, checking out Bathsheba. Is checking Bathsheba out. And Bathsheba was fine. Let's just be straight about it. She was fine. He's been seeing her grow up as a child because her great-grandfather was one of his mighty men. So he watched her grow up, and when he saw her taking a shower in the backyard, which you see in Africa to today, their fences are high, like 12 foot high. And the ladies sometimes will go in the back and take a shower. So nobody's supposed to be up that high to look down that low. But so was David. And when he saw her, that water rolling down her body, David kept looking. Joseph ran. David kept looking. And David failed. Man after God's own heart. A man that God stood with and built into him a legacy that ends up with Christ. And he failed. Well, folks, sometimes you look at people in the Bible, you see failure. You look at people in our world and we see failure. But a lot of times you come to our own lives, and when we fail, we want to run from God. We want to run from church. We want to quit reading the Bible. We want to quit doing our devotions. We want to quit praying because I just messed up. But mess up is all over the Bible. Starting with Genesis with Adam, you got mess ups everywhere. The man that we read half the New Testament about was a mess up. He was killing Christians, locking them in jail. He was a person who people were running from. It took 14 years for the disciples to accept him. 14 years for them to accept that Paul was somebody they could trust. 14 years. That's how much he ravished the Christian world. But he's the one that in the midst of all of his ministry life, he's whipped 5 times, 39 lashes. Do you know how lonely Paul's life was? Very lonely. If you look at Paul's life, and at the end of his life, his head is cut off. What about that life looks successful in our world of success? Nothing. It looks like failure. It looks like this guy didn't do nothing but get beaten, shipwrecked. This person says he's following Christ, and it's a mess every day. Failure never became defeat for these people. It was just failure. It was a process in life that led to a more productive life, a greater life, a stronger life. But many times in our walk with God, when we fail as a single person who's trying to live a pure life, but that guy or that girl just way too much, and then comes the baby, and then comes maybe sexual diseases. Oh God, I don't want to deal with God no more. Maybe a church disappointed them. Church didn't do what they expected. So we feel failure. And for that reason, they drift from God. They don't want to deal with God. They don't want to respond to God. They don't even want to come back to God. Oh, folks, failure is a part of life. That's what life has got, is failure. But if life becomes a failure, then it's a defeat. And it should never be, because the Bible says he who is in us is greater than he who is in the world. It should never become a defeat. It should just become an experience that makes us stronger. And that's why I want to pick somebody like Peter. Because Peter gets a bad rap. He just simply does. Peter is I call him the hood disciple, because he was packing. He was packing. Most of the disciples had 2 knives. Peter was ready. It didn't take him long to pull his knife out and do what he got to do. Peter would get a bad rap. He's seen as somebody who denied Christ and start cursing and all of this kind of stuff. And so I want us to look at Peter's life, because this same Peter preached at Pentecost. This same Peter became the leader of the disciples. This same Peter becomes somebody that Christ would send to Cornelius' house to reach the Gentiles. This Peter became one of the strongest successful stories in the Bible. Matter of fact, when you read the book of Luke, influence of Peter. When you read the book of Mark, influence of Peter. Peter became a great influence even when he showed great failure. What are the processes that led him from failure to success? Not by our world standards, because what the world calls success isn't success. Success can't be what the world says, because when you get to heaven, none of it adds up. When you finish gaining all of this world's goods and you arrive in heaven, God says, it didn't mean nothing. Ask the rich young man. Ask the rich man who would beg Lazarus to drop a drop of water on him. He didn't amount to nothing. Where's the car in heaven? Where's the house in heaven? Where are all of the jobs and the titles and the education in heaven? God used all of that for a person to be able to make a living. He didn't use that to get to heaven or to be productive in heaven. Our education in heaven, what does it mean? None of it matters. What matters is that when face issues in my life, does it become something that blesses me in the present and in the future and forever? The first thing we learn in this passage, you must take God for his word and accept life's challenges. Just accept them. Because you have to accept life's challenges. You may not like that diabetes is hitting you right now. You may not like that you cannot be as healthy as you want to be. You may not like the fact that you're still single when you want to be married. And there's a reality to that. God says one woman marries one man marries one woman. But there's more women than men. So guess what? Somebody gonna be single. I mean, we could dress this up. Somebody, just by sheer numbers, somebody gonna be single. Because there's more women to men. So if I don't accept what God has for me, there's an issue on the table. I don't accept it. I don't like it. I don't like the fact that I have no reason to divorce. None. There's no biblical reason for me to divorce, but I sure want to. That's what's going on here in Matthew 26. What's going on? Christ is literally telling them, you got a problem? And they're going, we don't have one. And literally, when you look at the text, they're shocked that he died. So they're not accepting what Christ is saying. They're not accepting it. And you have to understand now, we can get all uppity about it, but it's not true. When you look at these guys, they see a man walking on water. When you look at Jesus Christ and you're right there with him, he wakes up and said, peace be still. When you look at Jesus Christ, the people are trying to stone him to death, and guess what? They can't touch him. They want to kill him in the temple, he disappears. When you start keeping a close look at how Christ is when you walking with him, ain't no way they're going to die. This man does crazy things. He walks into a tomb and says, Lazarus, get up. How is he going to die when he's waking dead people back to life? See, it's easy for us to look at this situation and go, these guys are crazy. They needed to listen to Christ. They needed to listen to what Christ is saying. But when you look at what is going on for them, it's not what you think. David, great man, win the whole new world. The Messiah will come. That's what they learned from Ezekiel and Daniel. And he will reestablish the Davidic kingdom. They're under Roman oppression. The Romans are beating them down. And they're saying, here comes the Messiah. Guess what they're thinking? Davidic kingdom, power, might. That's why they're asking, who's going to be on the right? Who's going to be on the left? They're reading the Bible, but not interpreting it correctly. When they come to Christ telling them something, they can't accept it. And so life gets hard because they keep trying to change what Christ is saying is their reality. And they can't accept that reality. They can't accept it. When life gets hard, we want God to change his plan. And God is saying, I ain't changing nothing. This is the way you go. That's one of the reasons we fail. We can't accept, I may not get married. Watch this carefully, folks. We have to first accept God's challenges and stop striving with God's word. You can't change his word. Look at verse 34. Jesus said to him, truly I say to you that this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he's talking to Peter. Anytime there's a prophecy and it's very specific, that tells you it's a true prophecy. When people are lying, they tell you God gonna bless you one of these days. That ain't no prophecy. God gonna bless you one of these days. When a prophecy is very specific, it's telling you that the person who's saying it is telling you the truth. This very night, the rooster will crow 3 times. You will have already denied me, Peter. Peter doesn't accept it. He doesn't accept it. He doesn't say, you know what? Okay, I know that I'm going to die for you and I'm saying all this stuff, but if you say it, the man who says, peace be still, Lazarus come forth. If you say it, then would you work with me so I don't do it? He doesn't. He fights it. He fights it. Oh man, that's a frustration many times of a past. You're telling people this. You're telling them this is what the word says. I'm so sorry. The word is not a place where you're going to find God being politically correct. God is his word. He's true. He's not going to tell you things wonderfully so you can live in this world that tells you, they want to tell you you're heavy set. It's a car. It's not a used car. No. It's a second owned. They want to tell you all of these wonderful things. Your hair looks good. And then they get in the car and they go, girl, you should have seen her hair. It's all messed up. That's the world you live in. God is going to tell you the truth. You need Jesus. His word is a sword. It cuts. It sometimes just messes you up all the way, and sometimes it restores you. It's the word. It is truth. We have to accept what it says, even when it's not friendly to us. Peter doesn't, and it made his life more miserable than ever. Look at verse 35. And Peter said, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And the disciples joined in. There's one thing about Christ, I tell you. He ain't changing. To change his word is to change the will of God. And he ain't changing the will of God. Now, don't get twisted now. This same Christ is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He doesn't like the cup. The cup in the Bible is the wrath of God on sin. The beating, the spitting, all this. You know what it's like for Christ to take a beating? Everything is through him, for him, and by him. While they're beating him, he's keeping them alive. That's like a mother who raised her kids from the ground up and loved the child all the way up. And then the child stands in the kitchen and beat the mother and spit on the mother. And while the child is doing that, the mother is cooking dinner. He doesn't want it. So did Jesus Christ go through his own pain? Yes, he did. Is Peter going to go through his pain? Yes, he did. Why? Because God's will doesn't change even for Christ. And the more we keep trying to change the challenges that God gives us, is the harder our life gets. That's why he says this. When you face it, don't run. When you face it, don't run. Now some people run because that's all they see families do. When the husband and wife got into stuff, somebody ran. They saw mom and dad run. They watch family members, extended family members, when there's troubles and difficulties, they run. So all they knew to do when times get hard is to run. That's the worst thing to do, is to run. I would rather stay in a fire and experience the will of God than to run. Running is what you're going to find that Peter never did. And I want you to see what Peter said he meant. Peter meant it. And if I wish I could sometimes spend some time with the Greek text to show you how much the Greek text is working, that Peter really didn't plan to run. Peter didn't. I admire Peter. At least he fought. At least Peter didn't get up and just got out of the situation. Peter at least attempted not to run, and at least he stayed longer than the rest of the disciples. Everybody want to run from their problem. And God is going, what make you think you can run from me? You say I am everywhere all at the same time, and I'm fully God in every place that I am. So how could you run from me? Could you run from the air? You ever try running from the moon when it's shining? It just kind of shows back up like it's still in the same place. You can't run from the sun. The sun don't be the sun. You could jump in the plane and fly all the way to Trinidad. Guess where the sun is? Right there looking at you. You could try to run all the way to Africa and the moon is still staring at you. If God, who created the sun and the moon, can have it still looking at you no matter where you run, guess what? No matter where you run, you never run. Ask Jonah, where did Jonah run? You can't run from God. That's what Peter has to. One thing I love about Peter is he didn't run. Nowhere in the text. No, Peter cussed and ran. No, Peter never ran. Peter cursed and went outside and wept. Didn't run. That's why God chose him as his leader. Look at verse 51. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus reached and drew out his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ears. Folks, you got to see the text there. Peter's not trying to cut off this man's ear. Peter's trying to kill him. I guess the man ducked. Because the Bible is clear to say the word struck the slave means to come to somebody wanting to slay them. Nice Bible terms meaning wanting to kill them. Peter says, I'm going to kill you. You ain't taking this man. Peter intended to kill him. The guy just probably ducked. He got his ears. I'm sorry. You know, for y'all that may be simple, but to see Jesus when I'm fighting, put the man's ear back on, I'll be going, man, you got to be tripping. I got my dagger out, I'm fighting, I got the man's ear off, he's all messed up right now, he can't do nothing with you because his ear's messed up, and you would actually put the ear back on. What is wrong with you? Knowing me, I'll probably get out the next dagger. Let's fight. Look at Jesus. Jesus puts the man's hair back on. He puts his hair back on. And what does Peter do? Peter still stays there. Because Peter's sincere about, I will not leave you. I will not leave you. There's some things that trouble me about Christ. His word is not going to change. His situation is not going to change. He's going to tell us to be where we need to be. And he can tell us to stay where we need to stay. So for you as a single person, It can be very lonely. No, you can't just bring in a boyfriend or you can't just bring in a girlfriend. You can't check them out. No, you got to stay single. Yes, you're falling in love with them. Yes, you like kissing them and touching them, but you can't have intimacy with them. What is wrong with you? Well, I've heard all kinds of things. God wouldn't have given me these feelings if he didn't want me to satisfy them. I've heard all of that. God must want me to satisfy these feelings that I have, and that's why he's put this beautiful woman in my life. You know, that's the reason why there's sexual diseases. That's the reason why there are babies that come and now we don't want to fight with child support. Why? God put a plan together. We try to change it, but we can't change his results. Peter can't change nothing. He can't change it, but at least Peter doesn't run. He doesn't run. Watch this carefully, folks. This is what I love about Peter. He doesn't run. Here's what the Bible says. Peter, look at verse 58. Verse 58, and Peter was following him at a distance. Peter was following him at a distance. You have to see this in the Greek. Let me give you a little Greek stuff for just a minute. The Greek is saying, Peter following Jesus Christ was always his intention, and he never planned to stop following. See, it's easy for us to say he followed Christ, meaning he just walking from a distance. These bodyguards, these guards of the high priest were soldiers. They called them slaves, but they were soldiers. And these slow soldiers protected the high priest and protected how the things function in the temple. Because if a Gentile was to try to come into the temple, they had to protect the temple from the Gentiles. So these guards were like soldiers, warriors. So you got all these people and this whole entourage of people going down. And Peter's following from a distance. It can seem that way. But the text is saying, in the Greek text, it's an imperfect tense, meaning Peter's following him with the plan. I'm sticking with this. I'm not going nowhere. Then he took it further. He goes into the courtyard. The Bible tells us that John had some kind of relationship with the high priest. So as a result of that, Peter and John, you never see John was kind of somewhere in the distance because he has a relationship with the high priest. But Peter went into the court, and the word in Greek says he sat down, meaning Peter ain't planning to leave from sitting down. Peter wasn't going nowhere. What Peter said to Christ, he intended. What Peter said to Christ, he really meant. Peter really meant it. Peter wasn't going anywhere. He sat down, he went, he followed him. He's in the courtyard. He enters the courtyard and sits down. Peter is not going nowhere. But the situation just got worse. You know, sometimes you want to be in your marriage, but it gets worse. You want to be a good person on your job, but the job gets worse. You want to maintain being single and doing the right thing, but then there's things in your life you start trying out to satisfy yourself personally. And then that becomes a hook in your life when you do get married. And you can't let go of it. Because now you've been practicing that for a while to satisfy your feelings. Because you couldn't change it. You stayed single, seek to be faithful to God, but in the end, you're struggling with all of these passions and you don't know what to do. So you intend, you come to church, you read your Bible, you give to God, you serve. But the more you do it, is the more intense situations get because you're more lonely. The more you do all of this, is the more intense the situation gets because, you know, your marriage just don't be the same. So now you're stressed out. You don't know who to talk to. God sometimes puts us there, and that's what creates the failure. Because we want to run. We don't want to stay and work it out. You don't want to figure out what is the pattern that God has for us. And I always say this, if God doesn't change the situation, he's working on you. Because he could change the situation any minute or any day. He could change the situation any minute. That husband or wife can drop dead in 2 seconds. I don't care if they're eating all veggies. They can hit the sidewalk, hit their head, and it's over. And there could be a vegetarian dead. There could be a vegan dead. You could get married, Denzel show up and look at you only. At least for 5 days. We can have somebody marry us. We can have a wonderful marriage life, but it doesn't happen. Folks, don't run. Don't run. Let me tell you what happens when you run. What happens when you run is when you stop living by faith and start living by sight. When you run is when you stop living by faith and you start living by the flesh. When you run is when you stop living by faith and you start living by all the impulses you feel. And you become God and God is dethroned. When you start running, it's because you become selfish rather than selfless in your love for God. That's what leads you to run. Running is when my way of thinking is greater than God's way of thinking. When you run, when you decide to be your own God. It doesn't change anything. It just makes it more complex.
Life could be so challenging. I mean, God sometimes places us in situations where it seems so overwhelming. I mean, you have a marriage that could seem overwhelming. Just the fact that you're single for so long and just really want to be married, but there's just not a person that you want to commit your life to. And that gets overwhelming as that biological clock ticks all through the time. So folks, sometimes life is just overwhelming. Bills are high. Are we faced with that with faith or with fear, with intrepidation? Are we faced with that with God? What are you saying for us to do? What does your word actually say that we must do? Are you facing it with prayer? Are you facing it by putting together a group of people at your church and ask for prayer? What actions are we taking that is unlike Peter when he was overwhelmed? And Christ did not come out the way he thought he should be. Don't run from the challenges Christ gives us. Grow through them. That's the purpose of it. Stay focused. The following program is sponsored by Living Word Fellowship Church and Power Walk Ministries.